and not just the deepest part of our emotion. But in addition to being accurate, in addition to being accessible, it should also be applicable. Because what good is a set of ancillary facts if we don't know what to do with them? It is not just about what we know, but it is about what we do with what we know that makes all the difference in the world. Martin King said that education without morals was extremely dangerous, as a ship without a sail. And so it's our job to create experiences that are diverse, that are equitable, that are inclusionary, and that meet the needs of our 21st century society. We've had a lot of discussion as it relates to issues regarding CRT, whether it's culturally responsive teaching or whether it's critical race theory. We've had a lot of discussion about the politics that have infused themselves in our local school boards, not just here, but in our entire country. We had a lot of discussion as it relates to issues related to parental rights and a parent's ability to actually choose and fashion the type of education that our children receive. And the only reason we're here tonight is to hopefully engage in a conversation that says that my intelligence isn't based on the fact that I know all the answers, but it is based on the fact that I can challenge the answers that I have. I'm hopeful that we are so open-minded today as we dialogue that we will even challenge some of our own long-held assertions, that we will be willing to come to a place where we can hear each other, knowing that at the end of the day, our primary desire is that our children learn. And so I welcome every single one of you today. Welcome you to roll up your sleeves with us. Welcome you to ask the tough questions and to have a conversation that is long overdue. Because whether inequity is intentional and malignant, or whether it is unintentional, the effects are still the same on our children. We know that when we create a system of public education that serves everyone, then everyone does well. Likewise, we know that when we don't educate our children, calamity waits around the corner. I read this book from time to time, and it says that my people perish for the lack of knowledge. Our society is on the brink of danger simply because we refuse to give the gift to our children that people died for, that people fought for: education. So I welcome you. I thank every one of you for coming. I pray and hope that you will, again, be open-minded and that we can engage in constructive dialogue for the betterment of our young people. I think that when you start talking about disparities, one hard truth that we're going to have to come to grips with is that it is a system of design. Mm-hmm. That this system works exactly as it was designed. Horace Mann, who is known as, in some circles, the architect of public education, cites that public education doesn't dismantle privilege, but it actually perpetuates privilege. You can look at schools today and you can find that over 50% of the kids in our country who go to schools in districts, not schools, but they go in districts that are at least 75% non-white or white. 40% of African American children go to schools that are 90% non-white, which means that schools are every bit as segregated today as they were in '54. That's what that means. And when you talk about political ramifications, when I can see the difference between funding in the city of Richmond public schools or Petersburg public schools and Williamsburg, or see differences in funding in Northern Virginia, where I was educated in high school, and Culpeper or Madison County. It is a system of design. And until we get to the place where we're sick and tired of being sick and tired of being sick and tired of being sick and tired, and come to the place where we are willing to dismantle the system, then all we are going to get is more of the same. Martin King spoke, and he talked about integration. And when he spoke about integration, he said, integration costs America little. It didn't cost anything to allow African American people to be served. Actually, it helped economically. It helped the base economically, and it destroyed black business. And so when we look at it, he said the next phase of liberation is actually going to cost something, because that requires a financial overhaul. That requires you to understand that children who are in poverty require $2.2 more than the student who is not in poverty. That means you are going to have to reallocate resources in such a way that parents who have children who are not privy to pre-K education can have pre-K education. That means that we are going to have to be more diligent as it relates to trade and vocational programs for particularly minority students whose academic thrust or bend isn't college, so that when they come out of high school, they have a viable means to take care of themselves, their families, and not revert to crime. But this costs something. And as long as we dance around the issue that much of what ails us is by design, and that it is working according to plan, then it will continue to be the way it is planned. The one thing I would say as a middle school teacher is I think we definitely have to invest in our educators. Just as a question, point of privilege, I hope you don't mind, how many educators are here tonight? Wow. And let me share with you that when you tell those educators, as they told them in Arizona, all you need to do is get out of high school and we'll let you start teaching. When these teachers have taken classes during the course of their career to maintain licensure, when you tell them, and my father is retired military, my grandfather is a World War II veteran, my great-grandfather is a World War I veteran. I went to Department of Defense schools. I love the military. But when you tell me just because you're a serviceman, I can drop you in a classroom and you're going to be every bit as successful as an individual who spent their lives trying to practice this thing. When you tell them that, what you are telling me is that you don't value education. And when the community doesn't value education, then it isn't any surprise to me when our children come through our door and they don't value education. This thing is much more than me being a disseminator of science or math or social studies or whatever my content area is. I am a human development profession. I take courses in educational psychology. I take courses in pedagogy or the practice of teaching versus the subject that I teach. I take courses on group dynamics, and I take courses related to individualizing education, because not everyone is the same height, has the same hair color, speaks the same language, or has the same cultural barriers. This is what we do. And you would never go into a courtroom and tell your lawyer in the middle of the trial, you know, I really don't think you interpreted that law correctly. Why don't you let me take it from here? You don't bother your dentist in the middle of him drilling in your mouth and saying, I think you missed a spot, Doc. Can you go a little farther to the right? And yet every single day it has become fashionable to take educators who went into the profession because they simply had a hope in young people and treat them as if they don't know what they're doing. And I'm going to shine on your superintendent for just a second. When you're able to pay other superintendents who don't have any experience, and she has worked through the ranks, then what you're saying to her is that you don't value her either. And so the first step has got to be, if we believe in these professionals, then we have to listen to some of what they're saying. It is a partnership between parents and the business community and the professionals who spent their lives and their money and their time getting good at it. Secondly, I want to add one more thing, Pastor, and that is part of the fruit of this particular environment is understand what happened to us in 1920, right? 2019 and 2020, with your COVID-19 pandemic, and for the first time in a long time, parents were made privy to, not because the schoolhouse had closed its doors, but because the school was now in the house. And parents were, maybe for the first time, paying a whole lot of attention to what their children were learning. Some parents were not shocked at all with what their children were learning. Some parents were quite upset with what children were learning. And so what you have is the same type of situation in 1992 when they began the No Child Left Behind movement. We have a reform movement in education. And I think that that's important. I think that that's good because we have to continue to evolve if we're going to create an educational product that vaults us to the top of educational institutions or countries in the 21st century. There's nothing wrong with the discussion that is going on. Part of the problem, however, is as a result of that, the mistrust between the educational, so-called institutional educational professionals and the larger community has become exacerbated. So that we don't trust our superintendents, we don't trust our teachers, we don't trust our building administrators with our children. And we have to have forums such as these so that people can hear what is really going on, so that we can dialogue about the problems, the vices and the virtues of the educational industry. That is the only way we can work together to come up with palatable solutions to the problem. Because right now, you have parents who don't necessarily know what's going on in the schools. You have community or businesses that want to kind of insert their thoughts about what should take place in the schools so that children are ready to enter the workforce. And without that type of collaboration and without that type of trust, it can't happen. So part of what we're doing here, hopefully, is having healthy dialogue and discussion so that people are educated about education, for goodness sake. Because the days of, Johnny, what did you learn at school today? And Johnny being forthcoming about what happened in school today are next to none. So we have to be better educated so that the misinformation that you hear from news outlets, the misinformation you hear from certain persons, and all persons on all sides of the aisle engage in misinformation. It is up to us to make sure we have accurate information so that we can make decisions for our children that make sense. Thank you so much for that. I am an African-American male. African-American people, about 40 million persons in this country, represent 11, 12-ish% of the population. I represent, as an African-American male, less than 2% of the teaching profession. And so when we generalize this, understand, we think of things such as community policing, where it is important to have police officers that reflect the diversity in their community so there's relatability. We understand how important that is in community policing. We understand how important that is in business, where we have failed to understand it as much as in education, right? And so it comes down to, all right, well, and I've heard this in many cases with many rural districts, black people don't want to come here. Well, you're darn right, they're not going to want to come here if they get the idea that they're not welcomed. That's number one. But number two, my question is to school districts, central offices across the country, where are you recruiting? Because at every historically black college and university, there are education departments that are thriving, that are producing some of the best educational minds in America. As a matter of fact, the most educated subgroup in America happens to be African American women, which you can see evidenced on this particular podium. So it is not a matter of African American people not wanting to come in. It is a matter of resistance for whatever reason. And I say that somewhat facetiously. For whatever reason, we are unwilling to go through the lengths to hire, to recruit, to go find some of those black minds who, by the way, will love everybody's child. Because I don't know if anybody knows, when you are a minority, what you understand is that everybody deserves dignity. What you get used to is being the small or the least in the room and learning how to work with other people. What you learn is that all of us really have so much more in common than we have different. And so you don't have to worry about your children being in front of me. I can promise you that I love children and children love me, of all stripes, of all religions, of all persuasions, of all ages, of all. Echo a sentiment I actually learned as a kid in Frankfurt, Germany, when my father was in the military. And brother, I want you to please hear me, and that I thank you. My reiteration of what I was saying is me being heaven bent to hear you. And then me trying to clarify is the hope that you can also hear me. Because I believe that what is critically important is that we understand what I understood, what you understood at various duty stations. Even though we were on German soil, we were all Americans on that military base. It didn't matter what color we were. It didn't matter what faith we espoused. It didn't matter how long a particular family had been in the military. We were all Americans on that military base. You went to sleep when the TV turned off at about 12 o'clock and you heard the Star Spangled Banner, and it didn't matter. We knew we were all on the same team. And I think, to my dismay, to my chagrin, one of the problems that we have in America is that we are no longer committed to being the United States of America. That we, in our mind, have decided that it's more important for me to be right, and for me to be right, you have to be wrong. That we have forgotten, as our servicemen fight for this country every single day, that even when we disagree, we are part of the same team. And that on that team there are different roles, right? Some people are called to be school board representatives, because if you don't run for office, you can't get mad at who's in office. Some are called to be teachers and administrators. Some are called as parents to be a part of the PTO to support the school system. Some are called with other wraparound services that augment what we're already doing and make education fuller. That whatever your role is and whatever your perspective is, when you bring it to the table, you realize, hey, you might think that 2 + 3 is 5. I might think that 1 + 4 is 5. At the end of the day, it's 5. And that what is critically important is that even when we disagree, we are all a part of the same team. Our children cannot be educated optimally as long as we have decided that there are us's versus them. As long as we have decided that we have to win and they have to lose, as if we don't all lose. And so I would say, again, that's the lesson. However we move forward, know that we move forward as a team. At the end of the day, we want Madison children to learn. We want Culpeper children to learn. We want Rappahannock children to learn. We want children of the Commonwealth to learn. We want them to be the best people that they can be. And if we realize that, then even when we disagree, we'll be committed to a path forward. And I think we will regain some of what makes us Americans.